place in Russia. And I don't think that's a fact that's well enough known. Because a lot of people sort of say, oh, communism is to blame, the horrible Soviets did all the camps and everything, we hate them. But hang on, they inherited all this from the Tsar, who was doing the same for decades. And I think this is an important shift in the historical narrative. I think, for me, personally, I'm going to research this much more. I don't know if anyone's done a detailed history. Who is the Solzhenitsyn of the Tsarist prison camps? Apart from George Kennan, the American guy, who saw it all and reported on it and came back and wrote it up. And he was horrified by what he saw. Later, when the revolution happened and Lenin and co got into power, he actually felt the Bolsheviks would not be able to cope with what they were facing. He felt the Bolshevik, he sort of predicted they'll be just as bad. They don't really realise what they're up against. What they're going to do is seize control of the state and carry on doing the same, but even more ruthlessly and more efficiently, which is what they did. So I think if we're going to study the phenomena of Russian history and oppression and cruelty and what they're doing or trying to do in Ukraine, for instance, we have to sort of look at the whole history and go right back into the Tsarist era and the 18th, 19th century, and we have to ask why was this form of imperialism so brutal? America obviously did terrible things to the American Indians in its expansion west, and it committed atrocities and so on. But it wasn't shipping people west from Boston and New York and working them to death in mines in freezing temperatures. In fact, so I think there's some deep thinking to be done here, and I'll be reporting on that. Because I do think, if you recall, my approach to philosophy is it's like a healing. As philosophers, we're doctors of the soul. And our job is to find out where the soul's gone a bit wrong and how it can be redeemed. That's why Christ, I think, is an inspiration to philosophers in parts of the world. Because he was about healing too. And so I just wanted to share that. And yeah, it's quite horrendous really, but thank you for that work, Greg Wallance, and this amazing book you've put together. But I will be looking for any detailed studies of the pre-Soviet concentration camp system, and the question we can ask is, what could the communists have done? Because some of those early Bolsheviks were really idealists, they were utopians, they thought revolution was fantastic, they'd get rid of the old corruption. What could they have done differently so it didn't end up in Stalinism? So it didn't end up in Kolyma and the massacres in Siberia? That's a question. Okay, I'm going to stop there for now. Any comments on this sharing?
Wow. I had one thought about Germany. When you say the horror of the 20th century could be applied to the horror of the 19th century.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, was there an episode in the past showing that people of Prussia or other people living in that area could make atrocity like it happened in the 20th century? That's one
sure.
connection.
Well, I mean, I don't think so, actually. I mean, I'm reading, as it happens, a book at the moment, a 500-page history of the Holy Roman Empire, which is because I'm a specialist in European history and world history, and it's a kind of huge book I like to read. And this one by Peter Wilson, I've already read his book on the 30 Years' War, which, in the 17th century in Germany, massacres were committed, and against civilians. So, like, for instance, when they captured the town of Marburg, they slaughtered everyone, you know, men, women and children, against all the rules of warfare. So, but there was a kind of an idea that that was outside the norm, and everyone grumbled about that. That was not acceptable. It was a Catholic army that did that. Marburg was a Protestant town. But they were ashamed of it and didn't keep doing it. And it became a sort of pamphlet thing, that you made pamphlets of the massacres of Marburg, which inspired the Protestant troops to go on fighting tougher. But so there was cruelty in Germany. There were occasionally pogroms against the Jews, you know, but and there was this ridiculous Catholic Protestant thing. But they didn't have, so far as I'm aware, they didn't invent concentration camps to like kill people or to work them to death. They obviously had a penal system, and criminals would have probably had to go and work down the mines. I don't know about the history of. I know Germany had very early mining, gold mines in the south of Germany, and that's where all the Fuggers got their gold from. Was it worked by criminals? I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out. I wouldn't be surprised. One could do some research on that. But, you know, I mean, ironically, and this is just a little, I suppose irony is the right word, Nazism was an importation into Germany in many ways of white Russian exiles and Germans fleeing Baltic states from the revolution. And these people fleeing, like Arthur Rosenberg, and many of the top leading Nazis were actually not German. They'd fled into Germany from eastern parts, and they brought with them a virulent hatred of everything communistic and Bolshevistic. And so they probably had the idea of, I don't know, I'm just speculating, did they think of the idea of concentration camps because they knew what was going on in Russia? I wouldn't be surprised if it was an importation into Germany from people who knew how the Russian camps had worked. I mean, obviously people in Germany in the 19th century must have known this. I don't know if there was a German equivalent to George Kennan who visited and written up about it. I think they would have been horrified if they'd known. I don't know what happened to the Protestant conscience of Germany, you know, and they often supplied the scientists to Russia. And Lenin himself spoke fluent German. He was like a Germanophile. That's why he took Russia out of the war against Germany. He loved Germany, and he lived in exile in German-speaking parts of Austria and Switzerland and places. And he was one time going to be arrested by the local police in southern Germany, where he was hiding, living in the underground. And he went to see the head of police and spoke perfect German. Said, "No, I'm not a traitor. I'm on your side. I'm not plotting any revolution. The only revolution I want's in Russia." And the German guy gave him schnapps, and they had a long chat. He said, "Oh, well then, God bless you, my son. Go back and cause trouble." So he wasn't a threat to Germany at all, but he was a threat to his own people. So I don't know. Moral reformation, I think, is the key here. Tolstoy was on the right path, and I was fascinated. And he was a great philosopher in his own way, trying to keep the moral codes alive and awake in the Russian soul.
And I follow you, as you say, philosopher, kind of healing person, because this kind of tragedies seems to be highly pathological.
Yeah, it is. It's like a pathology. Yeah. And it's a mental pathology, it seems. It's like, and this is the trouble, people on both sides were so extremist. The Tsarists thought they had to suppress these people because they were Danish revolutionaries. And they were trying to kill the Tsar. I mean, they were having little clubs, sharpening weapons, getting bombs, guns. They were determined to kill the Tsar. And of course, killing people is illegal. I mean, if somebody was plotting in Britain now to kill God forbid, the king or the queen or whatever, they'd be arrested and put in prison. It's against the law. So that's why the legal system felt they should be dealt with. On the other hand, the revolutionaries, starting with the Decembrists in December in the 1820s already, felt that the system was so evil and corrupt and disfavouring the mass of the population and the poor, the poverty of the masses of ordinary peasants, that they needed to strike at the centre. So what the Decembrists did, which was mainly army officers, they tried to do a coup in St. Petersburg, and they were going to capture the Tsar and declare a new government, a democratic government. And they're about as liberal as the Liberal Democrats. All they wanted was a constitutional government and a parliament, which were radical revolutionary ideas in 19th century Russia. And that's what most of these revolutionaries wanted. They wanted a democratic Russia, which didn't really exist. The Decembrists were then arrested. It's quite horrendous. This happened in the winter, December, in St. Petersburg. The river was frozen. Some of them tried to flee across the river, and they were shot, and the bloodstains on the snow of the river left sort of bloody holes where they went into the ice and died. These were officers, highly intellectual and motivated people. Now, a lot of them survived, and they were shipped off to Siberia. And Kennan hears stories about them and even meets some of them when they're really old. So the revolutionary fight against the system had been going on for decades, and the government clampdown on these people was going on too. Now, I would have thought, if I was reincarnated into Russia in the mid-19th centuries, I would have thought, A, non-violence, this is why I agree with Tolstoy, non-violence has to be used by both sides, should get that idea across, but B, Parliament's quite a good idea, because then you can debate and discuss it. You can have your left wing and right wing, you can have debates and sublimate the violence. Instead of plotting to blow each other up, you can think it through. I would invest it in education, of an all-rounded variety, so that they get access to all the information. I would have put my periodic table in all the Russian schools. Some of these things wouldn't be there because some of the new religions weren't invented yet. I think if they'd have had that educational approach to peace, we could have avoided the Russian Revolution and the horrors of the Gulag and everything that followed. And we could have jumped to the kind of communism that Pierre Leroux wanted here in France, a sort of idealistic camaraderie of kindred spirits working together for a common cause, which George Sand and people wanted. These were the French evolutionaries, let's call them. Instead of revolutionaries, they were evolutionaries. They wanted the human soul to evolve to a place of maturity where we've dropped violence. I think that was Tolstoy's position, and I think, that's mine as well. It was Gandhi's. These wars, these horrors are reflections of a disease, a pathology, as you say, in the human soul. And it's just to do with our immaturity, I think. Children, when they're young, can be quite aggressive. They fight, they throw stones at each other. They're young, they don't understand that that's not acceptable behaviour. And I think that's what we're dealing with in some of these situations. So anyway, that's thanks for that. Now, the other thing, just to report briefly before we go and look at our periodic table, also, since we last spoke, we've had the Paris Peace Forum, which was extremely interesting. Debates on AI and ecology and all kinds of interesting discussions going on in Paris. Pretty high-level stuff. They're available to see on the web. They've got a good website. And it was a closed meeting this time, unless you got a special invitation, which I didn't get. So one has to watch it at a distance, but that's fine. And Also, we've had the meeting of the Wisdom Keepers Council with my friend Satchen Raja, and we're going to be producing a book about these meetings that have been going on every month for 2 years about how wisdom can transform the state of the world. You know, what would it be like? Because there's many horrors going on in the world now that we don't know about. There are camps in places like North Korea and in Russia that haven't gone away. You know, they're still active. So that whole and then there's tremendous problems with poverty, and of course there's the horrendous war of Gaza and Israel and Palestine and bombing in Lebanon, and the whole Middle East is like on a powder keg. And so how can wisdom make a difference? That's what we're going to be addressing in this book. And in my own work this week, I've been working on the 99 Names of Peace. I've done the Kashmiri language, the Sindhi language of South Pakistan. It's 30 million speakers, and it's an amazing amalgam of Indian Sanskrit etymology with Persian and Arabic influx. So it's most of the people that speak it are Muslim in the south of Pakistan. Karachi, the biggest city in Pakistan, speaks Sindhi, and it's got an ancient literature going back, you know, to the early Middle Ages. So that's fascinating. And I've also been doing Assamese, the language of Assam, in the far northeast of India, a part of India I've not been to. I want to go someday. And it's where the tea that we drink in Britain comes from. Assamese is the best quality tea, and I've discovered it was British explorers and botanists who discovered the Indian tea plant and planted these amazing tea plantations in the 19th century. Whilst Russia was sending people to their Tsarist gulag, we were growing tea in Assam. And it's still a flourishing industry. Lots of people work in the tea industry. And it was invented by Buddhist monks, really, earlier. Assam has got quite some amazing temples, goddess temples. It's the origin of the Shakti cult in Hinduism. They've got some of the largest temples in the world. So, and it was the Ahom kingdom for nearly 1,000 years. And it was never conquered by the Muslims, interestingly enough. The Mughals tried, but failed to conquer Assam because they defended themselves. So, and what's their language? It's fascinating. It's got amazing words, which are going in my 99 Names of Peace book. What I love about language and the study of languages as a key to world peace is if you look at a language like Assamese or Sindhi or Kashmiri, it shines a light on that geographical region and how we can maybe get peace there. For instance, in doing the Kashmiri language, I've discovered that there's a huge number of very, very great Kashmiri Sufis, poets, Islamic thinkers, philosophers, metaphysicians, who've been writing in Kashmiri for centuries. And some of the greatest thinkers of Islam speak Kashmiri and have done. Simultaneously, some of the greatest thinkers of Hinduism speak Kashmiri. They produced the Kashmiri Pandits, who are a sort of learned class of Brahmins for centuries. And Kashmiri Shaivism is one of the most sophisticated metaphysical varieties of Hinduism that exists. My friend Professor Gavin Flood did his thesis on Kashmiri Shaivism. And they talk about, you know, the cosmos is one body and consciousness is the witness of the universal. In order to understand this, we have to recognize that we are all Shiva and we are all that one unity. And that consciousness, when it recognizes that, that's called the recognition philosophy. That's the point of philosophy, is to understand our own collective divinity as humans. That's our job. So they've been writing this stuff for 1,000 years. There are ancient metaphysical texts in Kashmiri and in Sanskrit and other languages from this land, which is unbroken. It's a living tradition to this day. So this makes me think, well, hang on, some of the greatest thinkers in the world of Islam are Kashmiri speakers. Some of the greatest Hindus are Kashmiri speakers. And by the way, they include the Nehru family, which gave us the Prime Minister of India, whose museum I've been to in Delhi, where he had a study full of Buddha statues and things. He was a great man, Nehru, close friend of Gandhi. So why can't we get peace in Kashmir? This is what I'm thinking. Why can't we activate the intellectual wisdom of the Hindu and the Muslim community to put forward their own greatest thinkers from history and now, so that we can have debates, discussions and dialectic instead of bombs and terrorism and suppression by the Indian police who've demonised Islam as if it's something alien to India, but it's not. It is part of the soul of India and has been for over 1,000 years. So that's the work to be done in Kashmir, and that's why I'm doing this book, The 99 Names of Peace. It's not finishing the work, it's just beginning. It's saying, hey, this is what we've got to do. And I'm giving a talk, by the way, if you're interested, to the University of Kashmir on the 21st of November about the future of the humanities in the world of AI. Do we still need academia? Why don't we just ask everything of ChatGPT? Why do we need scholars, people like me? We can just go to sleep and replace ourselves with robots. Discuss. That's what the talk will be about. It's on the afternoon of the 21st of November. So if you're interested, come on Zoom to the University of Kashmir and hear me give a talk. Right. Okay, that's a little glimpse of what's going on here in the Museum of the Muses. The Muses are keeping one very busy. Right, let's do our periodic table. Any comments, or you've been busy in your garden too? This is very important. The true work, as Voltaire says, goes on in the gardening.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I've got my one.
Me too.
Right, what have you got?
Islam, Shiism.
Okay. Good. And I'm going to do Philosophy and Humanities, which is the very last one of the table, 168. So I'll do Shiism first, which is number 81. And I've always have you studied much of Shiism before?
No, I'm very weak at understanding the differences about
Different types of Islam.
Yes, especially I was wondering, for example, in Indonesia or in India.
Yeah.
Well, is it what kind of Islam?
Yeah,
It
is
is.
it Shia or Sunni or whatever? Yeah. Yeah, so that's always fascinated me. I first started studying Islam in depth in my early 20s. I'd resigned from my philosophy degree because I found it very narrow and I was interested in cosmic consciousness. And so I went and studied privately in Canada, in the University of Calgary, and I read the entire Quran. Having read the Bible, Old and New Testaments in depth with encyclopedias, it took 6 months, you know. I then read the entire Quran, along with early Islamic thinkers and commentators and stuff. And I realised this is absolutely profound stuff. I could kick myself. I said, why has nobody told me to read the Quran before? I mean, it's amazing. And I realised that it was a sort of update of the Old and New Testaments, which is what it says. Those prophets, they were great in their time, Moses and Abraham and even Jesus, we love them all. But now, Muhammad said, the Spirit of the Lord is telling me to pronounce this good news. There should be unity, there should be no inequality of believers, so if you're a believer on equal level. There's no priesthoods in Islam. Nobody can boss the other person or send them to Siberia because they're a bishop.
No Pope.
No pope, no. I mean, there is an imam who is the guide to the faithful. And obviously Muhammad played that role to begin with. And then one of the questions about Shiism is well then when Muhammad died, who takes over the role of the guide or the guardian of the community? Because they felt bereft. It was a small community to begin with, Islam. There weren't, it was a few tens or dozens of people, which grew gradually. Muhammad gave, in effect, adult education classes in Mecca, having spent 15 years studying and travelling the Middle East, working as a merchant, and absorbing and picking up ideas from all the neighbouring religions like Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, Manichaeanism, Judaism, and the different forms of Christianity, as well as the indigenous paganism of the Arabian people. So all this was synthesized in his soul. He's a deeply intelligent, moral person. And he came to the view that the reason for all the wars going on, the conflict, which was huge between the Byzantine Empire, which was ostensibly Christian, and the Persian Empire, which was Zoroastrian, and they were fighting every few decades to the death. He came to the view that if only everybody surrendered to God and stopped fighting, there'd be peace. The reason we're all fighting is because we're all egotistical and we're promoting our own worldview, our own perspective. Whereas we should be submitting to the Absolute, who is the divine consciousness, the Creator, who's responsible for all this, including us. And we should be following, that wisdom, and who has spoken in all the prophets, said Muhammad's teachings as they came through. He's spoken in all the prophets. So what Islam actually says is that all these boxes are sacred. They're all manifestations of the divine message in the language and the culture of the time. So all these pagan ones, every single pagan tribe had its prophets, its seers, its sages, its druids, who would have spoken in their language to tell the people the difference between right and wrong. They were all guided by the same universal divine consciousness. Muhammad realised, but now it was needing an upgrade. And that was the path to peace, which is Islam. That's what Islam means. It's the state of surrender. And if you think about it, a war, you fight till one or the other party surrenders, and then there's peace. So what Muhammad was saying is, let's just surrender, because the real war is between the human arrogance and the divine, which is the good. Anyway, long story short, I've done a commentary on the entire Quran. It's like 200 hours listening, and it's 3,000 pages. I'm in the middle of publishing it. So if you're interested in the details, and I do go there into the difference of the Shias and Sunnis. What the Shia position was that when Muhammad died, he had bequeathed his spiritual authority to Ali, who was his son-in-law, married to his daughter Fatima, who was his most important descendant. He loved her very much. And Ali had been with him when the Quran was produced. He was his second follower after his wife, Khadija. And Ali was his closest friend and supporter and cousin, and had helped him win any... Okay, in the beginning it was totally non-violent, you weren't allowed to fight, but when people started attacking the Muslims, Allah gave permission to fight back, eventually. And the Muslims, but they could only fight in self-defense, and they could only fight like avoiding deaths to non-combatants. They couldn't cheat, and so on. And Ali was his top general who protected him personally and saved his life several times, and rallied the Muslims when they were being defeated. He was an extremely brave warrior. So when he was dying, Muhammad, even before that, a year or two before he died, having a presentiment of his death, had got all the believers to acknowledge that Ali would be his successor. They were on a pilgrimage. He stopped the pilgrimage. He they all got off their camels, and he held up Ali's hand. He said, "This is my successor." And everyone agreed. You know, they all, yeah, fine. Obviously he is. Come on, like who else? The problem is Muhammad died very quickly, and there is some indication he was poisoned by a Jewish lady who hated him and wanted him dead. I don't think there's ever been a proper historical study of whether that's actually true, or was it propaganda. He certainly suffered symptoms of poisoning, and he died very rapidly. He was only in his early 60s, 63. I'd love to see a proper historical forensic study of how Muhammad died, but the tragedy of Islam is that he died too soon. He died before he had time to solidify the succession. And if it was murder, I think it's the greatest unsolved crime of history. And I'd love to find out the truth. If it happened to be a Jewish woman, well, that needs to come out if it's true. The Jews were fighting Muhammad at the time. They were fierce warriors in the desert, and they denied Muhammad's prophetship. They said, no, he's a fake, he's an imposter, we don't accept him. We go with Moses and Abraham. We don't like him. And so much so, they organised armed resistance. And Muhammad reluctantly authorised Ali and other warriors to go after this Jewish community in a place called Khaybar, which had been long a Jewish settlement, not far from Mecca, a few dozen miles away. And it was a fight to the death. And it's thought that this woman sneaked into Muhammad's camp and fed him poisoned chicken or something, which killed him off, and which was a masterly blow from their perspective, but a horrendous causer of future mess from mankind's perspective. So anyway, whatever caused the death, he died, and he left everything in limbo. He'd said Ali was his successor, but he hadn't built a structure into which Ali could step. Hadn't sort of left him his signet ring and all that. And what happened was other warlords, the big, rich, powerful Bill Gates, it's as if Trump dies. Let's say he's a leader of America and he dies suddenly. So Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Robert Kennedy Jr., they all come together and decide to elect someone. The billionaires of America, and they elect, I don't know, Elon Musk, God forbid, right? And then he pronounces he's going to be the new president. That's kind of what happened. The rich warlord types who'd been profiting from Islam as a raiding business, Muhammad had been trying to keep reins on this. No, it's not about making profit. It's not about fighting for fighting's sake. The greatest jihad is against your own ignorance, he said. But they were, some of them weren't happy with this nonsense. This was like hippie nonsense, woo-woo as they call it now. And so the minute he was dead, they elected one of their own kind. And Ali was ignored, even though it had been said he'd be successor. And 3 times this happened. Ali was passed over at the succession in 3 elections, and they appointed the same type of, basically, CEOs of Mecca's trading empire, very rich people who had, and they weren't necessarily bad people. I mean, they were elected because they had a lot of followers who liked them, and but the spiritual tradition or lineage of Shiism says, although they were not bad people, they weren't inspired, illuminated, and enlightened souls. They weren't true, they hadn't understood the depth of what Islam was about. They saw it just as sort of business. The